Hello everyone, and welcome. I hope you're feeling curious as you wrap your ears around these words. I hope you get something tangible from this episode, and I really hope you remember that nothing I say is true. If you want the truth, your truth, you'll need your own truth filter, your very own bullshit detector. So here's a thought from the off. If any of you out there in the big wide world would describe yourself as a structure fiend, as someone who likes to be anchored, and yes, believe it or not, there are people who walk among us who prefer being rudderless. Well, this wee intro is for all those who wobble without a framework. We started this club with a trailer setting out our stall. We then asked the question, how important is wellness? And if it is important to you, then maybe you stay around for a while, just to see what's what, just to see if this is going to be worth your while. We then moved on with a wellness focus lens to acknowledge the most horrendous news, that we live in a hostile world. Oh no! Oh yes. But here's the good news. We don't have to wait for the authorities to make spaces safe for us. We can create our own nurturing havens. Yay! Double yay! And yay again. So where do we go next? Well, how about we explore the idea of being our very own self-detective in more detail? After all, this is the Self-Detective Club, and we are all kinda supposed to be, going in that direction. So yeah, that's the structure. We're bringing the camera that little bit closer to ourselves so that we can start the process of being our very own self-sustaining wellness guru, our very own self-nurturer, our very own self-empowered, self-reflective, super sorted, personally developed, all-round good egg. Then, dear listener, in future episodes, we can begin to sort out some of the changes we might want to instigate. We can find the tools we'll need, the skills we can adapt, the missions we can go on, and yes, the structures, the frameworks, the mapping that is going to help us stay focused and stay on track, so that the revolutions keep on coming throughout our lifetime. But why, oh why, is this episode called Why Bother Being a Self-Detective, when it could just as easily be called The Joys of Investigating Yourself, or simply Don't Get Mizzy, Get Busy? Well, I guess this session is as much for the doubters as for the believers. Or to be more precise, it's going to address both of these sides that exist within us, myself very much included. So here goes. Why bother being a self-detective when practically no one else is? It's not like a thing, is it? It's not like there is any expectation on me as a citizen to have any level of self-awareness. Far from it. Okay. Fair enough. Thanks for that. I'd like to answer this from a historical perspective, if I may. So let's straight away head over to 9th century BC, where we'll find a huge sign on the Temple of Apollo, which reads, Know thyself. Imagine that. In a sea of words and phrases, I wonder why, 2,700 years ago, in what we now call the Dark Ages, know thyself was considered so important. I mean, why bother? Maybe it was for the same reason that Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. And staying in ancient Greece, we also have the beginnings of personal development with the notion that one could flourish given the right virtues. And meanwhile, Stoicism was set up to promote self-mastery, while at the same time Buddhism sought to overcome suffering through the inner peace of meditation. And why bother making the point that distress could actually be a physical thing rather than a supernatural thing, as Hippocrates pondered in the 4th century BC, giving rise to the study of the mind, otherwise known as psychology, as well as developing a notion of wellness as opposed to illness. Although the Indians practicing Ayurveda from 9000 BC might have something to say about that. They were blending the body, the mind and the spirit together, which is sometimes referred to as the knowledge of life. And all the while we have all these different studies of the self building up, from an anthropological perspective to an ethnological inquiry, from the concept of the psyche from Greece to the Chinese Taoist reflections, African concepts differing from Oceanic concepts, and on it goes. Into the 15th century, and hermeneutics came onto the scene, the study of interpretation. Later, this would provide a platform from which people could start to seek truth. While in the 16th century, Thomas Hobbes had an idea of introspection. If you get to understand yourself, you'll get to understand others. This was the same era that the term resilience came into being, the ability to spring back, to recover from adversity. Within the period of enlightenment, the shift away from the divine, it allowed the idea of human potential to become a thing. The German writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe kept the theme of self-knowledge and truth-seeking alive with his early phenomenological musings on our very own subjective conscious experience. This despite the romantic English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge urging people to ignore thyself and strive to know thy God. Moving on into the 1800s, and we have Ralph Waldo Emerson, who isn't only saying know thyself, but trust thyself. And we also have at the same time Henry Thoreau writing a piece called Civil Disobedience, bemoaning how society doesn't trust or encourage people to be individuals. So we need to trust our own voice, trust our own instincts, resist the lure of conformity, strive for our very own authentic self. He's saying if you want to be a happy bunny, then self-reliance is the key. And then the concept of personal liberation and individual freedom burst onto the scene with feminism and anarchism. And now we have the likes of Emma Goldman, who asked the question, how to be oneself and yet in oneness with others? Like, how can we meet our needs without it impacting badly elsewhere? Around the same time, we have the origins of science fiction, where we don't need to be constrained by what is. We can now start to ponder what could be. Anyone read The Dispossessed by chance? And then we get to the psychoanalysts of the early 1900s, who took know thyself to mean working out our unconscious mind, while the humanists took it to mean self-actualizing, the fulfillment of one's potential, having a meaningful existence, a deep sense of purpose, a deep sense of belonging. Into the 1940s, Viktor Frankl suggested that instead of looking for the meaning of life, could we not look for the meaning of our own lives? This could give us control, agency, of more of a say in our lives than being merely passive, since no matter what, we always have the choice of how we respond to circumstances. Then in the 1950s, the founder of person-centered therapy, Carl Rogers, recognized that people moved away from distress when their conditions became favorable. He, as with Irvin Yalom, noted that it is the relationship that heals. It's the relationship that helps create the safe conditions that are going to facilitate change. But he also noted that self-education was a crucial part of the equation. He said, significant learning is facilitated in therapy, learning which is more than an accumulation of facts. It is learning which makes a difference in the individual's behavior, in the course of action they choose in the future, in their attitudes, and in their personality. It is a pervasive learning which interpenetrates with every portion of their existence. Which fits in well with George Melly's personal construct theory. This was developed to help people make sense of the world around them. Melly saw each individual as having their own unique experiences and different ways of seeing the world, which they used to construct their own reality. He coined the phrase people as scientists, and by this he meant that people are their own self-scientist. People experiment and explore themselves because they're interested. Understanding what makes us tick isn't just for psychologists, it's for everyone. And we do it whether we're aware of it or not. It's just that if we do it, it's much better the more awareness we have of this fact. This also fits in well with John Dewey's idea of people thinking for themselves and learning by doing, otherwise known as experiential learning. Now, into the counterculture of the 60s and the individualism of the 70s, and we end up with self-directed learning, where people start taking responsibility for their own wisdom by choosing their own threads of inquiry and their own resources. Here we have lifelong learning motivated entirely by ourselves. Here we get to solve real-life problems using our own experiences to shape our learning, to shape our awareness, to shape our well-being. A process Maxine Greene referred to as wide awakeness. So here we get to tell our own story, hear our own story, figure out what it means, learn, relearn, unlearn, reflect on reflections, critical thinking, looking for clues, process of elimination, trial and error, all the tools and skills we need to become good self-detectives, which is how we now find ourselves in the present moment, in the age of wellness. So yeah, maybe a shorter answer can be, we bother because there's never been a better time to bother, because we're in good company, because all these rich musings down the ages can now be placed under one roof, and from this storage center we can pick and mix the stuff that will go into our very own detective agencies. Okay. And pause. And breathe. And on to the next question. Why bother being a self-detective when you can just make yourself a lovely cheese sandwich instead? Yeah, thanks for that one. So, white bread is a staple food for many people across the world. It also happens to be nutritionally bankrupt. Like there are stages in the process of making it where you actually take the goodies out. The bran, the wheat germ, the fiber, the vitamins, the minerals, leaving just the starchy bit. Then along comes chlorine dioxide to bleach the poor bastard into submission. Overall, the bread market in the UK alone is around £6 billion a year, and some of the big providers would think nothing of spending a couple of million to market and advertise these ultra-processed, bloaty McBloaty-face slabs of unwellness. Let's now introduce alfalfa. This translates into English as the father of all foods, because it is so nutritionally rich. It's also ridiculously cheap. You can even sprout the seeds in your own kitchen and harvest them in 5 days. So what's the value of the market for this extraordinary super-duper food? What's the advertising budget for such an amazing addition to our collective universal well-being? I mean, after all, you are what you eat. Well, the answer is, I have no idea, because it's negligible. I mean, it's not even worth recording. But I do know that there is more advertising spent on alfalfa as livestock feed than for human consumption. Why am I bothering to say this? I'm saying this because the people who make and advertise white bread clearly do not give a damn about our wellness. But they do give a damn about pocketing our money. We know this. But here's the thing. How are we supposed to give a crap about our own wellness if all we see around us are actors in adverts pretending to have some amazing organismic experience while eating shitty food? I mean, how are we supposed to give a shit about our own wellness when our parents, our carers, our peers, our schools, our hospitals, our offices, our day centres are all pushing white floured bread, biscuits and cakes down our throat? When all the while there are these affordable, disease-busting gems remaining just out of reach. Unless, dear listener, you are prepared to do your own detective work and root them out. Oh yes, in case you were wondering where on earth we were going, we're back on track. This is the point where I say self-detectiving is to our psychological world what alfalfaing is to our cellular world. Being a self-detective is cannabinoid gummies for the psyche. It's an apple a day to keep the depression away. It's fish food for the brain without the acid reflux. It's a springboard for deep diving into the unconscious. So yes, if you want optimal nutrition, you check out spirulina, chlorella, noni, propolis, linseeds, brewer's yeast, psyllium, yada yada yads. And if you want a healthy mind, you check out attachment theory, individuation, games people play, the Honopopo prayer, trauma release, and on it goes. So much stuff to sift through if you want to, if you make that choice, if you can be asked. But take note, you won't find these jewels promoted on any billboard or any temples nowadays, because there's no money in it. That's why we say we are the ones we've been waiting for. That's why this club started, because our own individual societies are not set up to give a flying organic fig for wellness, not of the freebie, self-initiated and self-empowered variety. The message I get from the white bread alfalfa paradigm is we're in this alone. We exist within a wild west of information/disinformation, and unless we question stuff and explore alternatives, then man, we are consigning ourselves to a life that isn't really ours. A truly unexamined life. A life that merely repeats or reacts against whatever the last generation did or didn't do. And I know it sounds obvious and banal to say, you only know what you know. But you only know what you know, right? So how can you ever figure out that things in our life can improve without first having a knowing, our very own knowing, by piecing things together, by joining up the dots, by having eureka moments, by being our own self-detective? There is a book out there in the world called Advertising Shits in Your Head, Strategies for Resistance. I wonder what you make of this title. I wonder what you make of the idea that as well as only knowing what you know, you only know what's in front of you. Like, you don't know what's in the background, because in the background, things are hidden from view. So what is in front of you, dear listener? Could this be a good question to ask yourself? As well as, who served up what's in front of me? And what else could I have in front of me that could give me a glimpse into a whole new world, a whole new way of thinking? What were to happen if you turned around 180 degrees? Does this answer the question? I mean, cheese is another issue altogether, and I'm not going there with the bloody barge pole. Okay, next question. What's in it for me? What's the incentive? It's not like I'm going to get paid for doing this stuff. It's not like it's going to make me more successful or wealthier, is it? So why bother being a self-detective? Okay. Well, how about this as an immediate riposte? It's a quote from Jim Rohn, and it goes like this. The greatest gift you can give to someone is your own personal development. Imagine that. Imagine not dumping your baggage onto others because you've already dealt with it. Imagine having better relations with others because you took the time to invest in yourself. Imagine being able to really immerse yourself in your community because you were prepared to know thyself and get to know others at a deeper level. Imagine being able to voice elephants in the room because the search for truth is so much more satisfying than going along with falsehoods. Imagine being able to form a surrogate family if your own existing family is dysfunctional, because you can, because your eyes have been opened to this possibility. I mean, yes, self-detective is undoubtedly intrinsic rather than extrinsic. You don't participate to win, you participate for the experience. So maybe bothering depends on how much you care about the world around you. You know, in the shelter of others do we exist? So yeah, okay, that's the polite answer. This is the more outspoken answer. This is going to be pretty challenging. An ant becomes a zombie ant when it's infected with a fungus, which hijacks its head and limbs, making it perform actions that benefit the fungus and the fungus alone. What if the same could be said of humans? A human becomes a zombie human when it's infected with ideas and beliefs that are contrary to its own natural urges, desires, and wellness. We've talked about white bread, but this is much, much bigger. What if people are educated at school on how to be good for the economy rather than being good for themselves? What if people are so easily tapped into psychologically that they can be manipulated to vote against their own interests? What if people are suffering from learned helplessness because they have so little control over their lives that they've all but given up on themselves? Could this lack of understanding, this lack of awareness, this lack of thought, explain why so many people are hurting themselves and in turn hurting other people? I'm calling this the average person blues because it sounds like something Gil Scott Heron would have come up with. What if the average person is a potential danger to themselves and to those around them through sheer ignorance? What if the average person is oblivious to their daily transgressions? What if average people become average parents, dumping their own frustrations onto their kids because they don't know any different? What if average people become average teachers, casting their resentments and unfulfilled dreams onto their pupils? What if average people become part of the average police force, oppressing vulnerable people with their power because they can get away with it? What if average people become average CEOs and average politicians, their corruption, their lies, stemming from their thoughtless entitlements? And so it goes on, and so it goes round. Average children entering the world oven ready to be distressed and distressing. I know, it's been said before, cheerful little messenger, ain't you? But you know, I'm just throwing ideas up into the air and seeing where they land. And you know, pre-1980s, I was brought up in a very reserved culture, suffocated by suppression, restrainments, and quiet desperation. And what a shit show that proved to be. Post-80s, I was surrounded by rampant individualism, where it was okay to screw or be screwed. And what a shit show that was too. So can I declare a self-interest in your own self-sustained wellness? I'm so tired of emotionally stunted people can't be bothered to sort their shit out. To me, ignorance is nothing short of violence. And you know, if you don't want to be part of the average person blues, if you don't want to have the screaming memes, you could do a lot worse than become your own self-detective and end up with a whole bag of choices and responses at your disposal. Hell, you could even make an appearance on this podcast, talking about a subject that is dear to you. podcast@selfdetective.net. Do drop me a line. My name is Simon, by the way. And the final why bother, for this episode at least, I haven't got the time to explore myself in great detail. Our selves are the ultimate rabbit hole. Where would we even begin? And more worryingly, where would you end up? I don't want to shine an aimless torch into my mind. Who knows what would come up? I prefer to wait, and if something does go wrong in my life, I'll research it, or I'll seek out an expert. To be honest, I think it is a bit reckless of you to promote doing mental health stuff yourself. Thanks for this. And yes, there is no getting away with it. Being a self-detective is a big project. And for it to be effective, it's a lifelong pursuit. But if I can be playful, just as you are worrying about bothering, I worry for anyone who is not invested in their own lives. I worry for anyone who is happy to let experts determine their lives. But let's start with time. Here's a thought. You take the time to learn to read, to write, to work up sums. You learn to paint, to hike, to climb. Learning any kind of new stuff can be a right faff, but once you've learnt them, they're usually there for life. Not only that, but once you've learnt one thing, this can open up many new possibilities. Like, once you can swim, you might then want to dive. Once you can dive, you might want to become a diving instructor. Or you might then want to study fish, become a marine biologist. It's exactly the same with self-detecting. Once you make a start, it becomes easier. Once it becomes easier, it becomes automatic. Like, once you are set up, there will always be a part of your brain that is looking out for you, that has your back, has your self-care, has your needs at its very heart. It will be there, ticking over, even when you are having fun, able to step in when the fun stops, able to help out when your world feels like it's falling apart. The whole idea of having a self-detective community is to make it easier, less daunting, less time-consuming to know thyself. Hopefully this podcast can be the scaffolding to hold you while you make tentative steps towards self-reliance. A bit like stabilizers on a bike. Hopefully the listening and the sharing can help the pennies drop. I'd also like to add that there is a false economy to not doing your own work. By that I mean, reacting to something on the hoof is a lot messier and time-consuming than prevention work. As Frederick Douglass said, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And if you think you can get an expert to come to your aid in a timely fashion, as and when you need it, that would be wild. In my world, you can wait years to be seen. And just out of interest, I don't know what you're expecting when you encounter a mental health expert. And I guess I say this as one myself. Are you just going to open the conversation with, "I'm broken, fix me"? Because even though they are experts, they are not experts on you and your own unique circumstances. They're still going to ask you questions about yourself. And if you can't give them decent answers, how do you think they're going to help you? Other than give you some generic prescriptive treatment. There feels like a vicious circle going on here. You don't trust yourself to understand yourself well enough to trust your own understanding of yourself. So you rely on experts, even though they do not know you, because you've put all your trust in their knowing, even though they do not know you as well as you know yourself, however limited that might be. You know, a full human life is a long, long life, and there are going to be so many potholes in the road. There's plenty of opportunities to thrive and to decline. If you live a passive life, where you make things up as you go along, is it fair to say that you can just as easily become tangled up, unstuck and undone by random acts, as it is to find ways to repair unplanned ruptures? I mean, if you roll the wheel of fortune, what do you think is going to happen if one day you stop liking yourself? Like, literally, what would you do? What can you do? What I mean is, what kind of choices and options will help you get through this tricky time? And what do you think would happen if you did nothing? You just disregarded it, hoping it would go away. Are we okay to hold that thought? Because this is the kind of stuff that we'll be looking at in future episodes. You know, the gloves are off now. We're done with all the preambles. The episodes that now follow are going to be much more hands-on and direct. So, until the next time, through time and space, I'd like to wish you well. And for the final thoughts on the subject of bothering thyself, I'm going to pass you over to two musicians. First, Diana Ross with some lyrics from the theme to the film Mahogany, and then Gil Scott-Heron from his final album. Do you know where you're going to? Do you like the things that life is showing you? Where are you going to? Do you know? Do you get what you're hoping for? When you look behind you, there's no open doors. What are you hoping for? Do you know? Because I always feel like running, not away, because there is no such place, because if there was, I would have found it by now. Because running makes me look like everyone else, though I hope there will never be cause for that, because I will be running in the other direction, not running for cover, because if I knew where cover was, I would stay there and never have to run for it.